Welcome to Hollywood Stuntmakers. On this episode, we'll witness the power of computer-generated effects. We'll take a behind-the-scenes look at the first use of computers in the movies. We'll see how the evolution of computer technology has helped directors create what would have been considered impossible a few years ago. And we'll also join with Industrial Light and Magic 7-time Oscar winner Dennis Muren to discuss the great special effects film Terminator 2. All this and more on Hollywood Stuntmakers. Hollywood has always embraced new technology. When audio recording became possible in the 1920s, the movies immediately began to talk. Hollywood was just as quick to seize upon the potential of the computer. Filmmakers always set out to dazzle the viewer, but today's audiences are more amazed than ever. Computer-generated images are Hollywood's newest and most powerful visual effects tool. It all began with Disney's ambitious 1982 film, Tron, the first movie to contain computer-generated images. Tron was ahead of its time and changed the face of visual effects forever. Disney's head of visual effects, Harrison Ellenshaw.
Tron was, from my mind from the very beginning, was a huge opportunity to do something on film that film is very capable of doing, and that is to create a whole new world. And you can go places on film. Film is unique as a medium. It's not like poetry, it's not like music. You can visually show something that people have never seen before.
The computer not only generated these images, but served as the environment for much of the film's action.
Man goes inside a computer, and it's not just wires and circuit boards, but he's inside, and it's another world that we create from scratch. And also, we were really taking advantage of the birth of computer-generated imagery. And it was extremely ambitious to expect to get 15 minutes of CGI. Tron was the beginning of all that promise. The promise on Tron was, in 5 years, this stuff will revolutionize effects work and filmmaking as we know it. Two things on Tron that were different and unique. One was the use of computers to do very labor-intensive work, to be able to do many different frames of film and to computer-generate light cycles, tanks, and a world that looked like it was made by a computer, but we used that to our advantage. So you could take, in a computer, all a computer does is it crunches a lot of numbers. It doesn't create really anything. It just does a lot of calculations. But you're able to get footage that when programmed comes out the other end and the computer's done all the hard work. Now, that's 15 minutes of about an hour's worth of footage. The other 45, though, was done by hand, was very labor intensive. So the difference here became, how do you do 1,200 shots in a 6-month post-production schedule? A tremendous amount of it was done with cells. People were photographed in 70 millimeter, you put them onto cells, and then had to rotoscope in areas where color was added. So you had 20, 30 exposures on a downshooter on an animation stand. We had 13 animation stands through the studio, throughout town. We had 750,000 cells that 80% of them went to Taiwan and came back in 3 months, all inked and painted. It was, on the one hand, a lot of fun. It was craziness. It was satisfying to finally see these images come together, to see 1,000 shots put together that were all effects. You got over an hour of wall-to-wall effects. The ironic thing was that we had 400 people working on that show. I mean, it was terribly labor-intensive.
Industrial Light and Magic began working with computer-generated images in 1988 with the movie Willow. This transformation sequence is actually the first instance of the morphing technique made famous by Terminator 2. ILM's 7-time Oscar winner, Dennis Muren.
Morphing has suddenly become the sort of buzzword, but what it is it's essentially when you take one two-dimensional image and another two-dimensional image. Two-dimensional meaning you've already photographed 2 pieces of film, and you can take an image off of one and apparently blend it into the other. It sort of changes its outline and its shape, and it sort of appears to metamorphose, where the word came from, into another shape. I try to bring them, my moments into the movie to be as heightened as they can be, to leap them a little bit farther into their imagination than they thought possible, so they can then get more and more sucked into the story and more believe what's happening.
Before the computer was ready to synthesize the images, models of the animals needed to be constructed in various stages of metamorphosis. ILM's Gene Bolte.
This transformation, they wanted to see quickly one animal literally growing or shrinking from another. Well, what they would do in the computer department would be take our model of a goat, and then our next stage, which was a model of an ostrich, and in between even, we did half and halves, so that you had kind of like an animated stages of development. And they'd film those moving, so you didn't have just a static thing. You'd have it actually doing something, growing and shrinking a little bit. And then the computer department take 1 point from the goat, 1 point from the midway, and they link those together and pull the things apart or push them together, depending what they have to do. And that went various stages all the way through the transformation. So you didn't have anything harsh and happening too fast. You got a nice flow of movement from one to the other. And Doug Smythe was the computer artist who was very instrumental in working out that morph technique, which was the word they used for that thing where the animals and creatures are transforming and growing in 3 dimensions. And I've heard Doug say that he never thought he would use it again. It was a formula that he worked out and never realized how useful that was going to be in the future.
ILM's computer work continued in the 1989 film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For this scene, director Steven Spielberg insisted that the villain's destruction be seen without the use of cutaways. The entire disintegration had to take place in front of the camera. The solution?
There were about 4 or 5 different masks that were made of different areas of decay that were going on the guy's face. And they were all programmed by motor so they could go through the same sort of motion. So each one of these masks that shows different levels of decaying all could move through the same program. And then they were morphed. One was morphed into another, into another, into another. So it appeared in one shot that the entire thing fell apart. And in fact, you were seeing many, many models of different decays that were all morphed together.
Computer-generated images have come a long way in a short time. By 1989, filmmakers had already developed the technology to create things that simply do not exist. An entire image could now be generated by computer software. This pseudopod from James Cameron's underwater adventure, The Abyss, was created by Steve Williams and the computer experts at ILM. Steve Williams.
On The Abyss, my job was a senior animator, and I had 18 scenes, 72 seconds. The job was to animate the pseudopod creature moving throughout these different scenes. So once again, we photographed everything, knew the exact size of the room, and animating cross-sections over a spine, essentially, that move within the environment, and then reflecting the environment, plus adding one additional pass to look at as though it was refracting, and then running a little program over the surface that rippled at an XYZ in time.
This is the computer graphics mainframe at Industrial Light and Magic. It took a crew of 6 people 6 months to complete the 72 seconds of computer animation for The Abyss. Here's Steve Williams to demonstrate how computer animators created the pseudopod.
The device here is a 3-dimensional wireframe modeler that we use. It's sort of run with a mouse, and we can operate in a 3-dimensional environment with a front, right, top, and perspective view. We can use, these are wireframes that we're using. So you can manipulate the wireframe. And pushing and pulling points on the surface is always changing the surface of the object. This is how we end up doing it. So we can actually, as opposed to doing this interactively, we can actually animate this over time. We can display 16.7 million colors simultaneously. Lights are also interactive. So as I move this light around, it's affecting the surface of the object. Also, animating surfaces is like so. We'll say this is our first keyframe. Make an alteration to it like this. Call this our next keyframe. This is exactly the way the animation will end up looking. So that's how we do it in time. Okay, animating something like the pseudopod was using a spine like this. So the actual spine was animated first, and then it animates automatically, filling in the actual in-between key position, like that.
Through the use of laser scanning, the computer artists at ILM then gave the pseudopod a personal touch.
Because of digital technology, we're capable of taking frames of a film and scanning them in. So you can imagine we can manipulate them in any way. Having that capability, plus the capability of using a device called the cyberware scanner, we can scan in images or inanimate objects like hands or cups or a face in this case, and it fires a laser at the face and extracts the data. We take that data and we, in this case, put it on the end of the pseudopod. In order to get it to animate and talk, we would scan in separate keyframes and then in between them as we wished over time. So that's how we got the actual smiling and the tongue sticking out.
It's trying to communicate.
In another shot, you noticed where the pseudopod was going through a door, and then the door shut, and then all of a sudden the pseudopod went down, and then it somehow miraculously turned into real water. At the time that we shot that, there was actual water coming down throughout the entire scene, but we painted out halfway up. So all you see is the pseudopod there. It starts to drop, and then the water forms.
Terminator 2 won 4 Academy Awards for special effects, and it was T2's use of computer-generated imaging that established a new benchmark for special effects. The computer animators at ILM had the monumental task of generating more than 40 different shots of computer images. A crew of 50 visual effects artists worked for the better part of a year to complete the film. For the artists at Industrial Light and Magic, all those hours at the computer terminal had paid off. Here's Dennis Murin.
The entire T2 project was the most challenging project I've ever worked on. There were so many things that had to come together on that show for it to work. One is we had to figure out how we could just digitize film so we could do all the digital work we needed to do in the middle, all the software generation of images and all, and then get it back on film. That was a major hurdle. Previously, we'd done like 4 shots in Back to the Future 2, and we'd done a couple shots like this. But to think we could do 45 shots with a deadline was a big deal. So it took a lot of figuring out of stuff. And I actually took a year off work to kind of, for T2, to actually kind of see if this was an avenue that I felt I wanted to pursue, this digital technology, or whether we should, put it on the back burner for 5 years and let other people figure it out.
This scene required a complex combination of live-action footage and computer-generated images. ILM Steve Williams.
One of the biggest problems in Terminator was to try and give an illusion of plasticity. So pieces of geometry were falling off them, yet it was totally smooth and not showing any hard-cut lines. And computer graphics, if treated wrong, will show very, very hard edges. And on film, it just looks like a scrape on a car. So we did a lot, what we call a technique called ray sampling, where we take a patch of geometry and fire it against the 2 areas that are broken, and it creates a nice smooth fillet in between them. There's another neat one in Terminator where there was a problem of taking somebody and passing his head through bars, right? In that one shot where Robert walks through the bars. I mean, I even heard one guy sitting behind me go, I know they did that shot, they did it using jelly. In fact, it wasn't. It was supposed to create the illusion of that. So, element 1, Robert walking. in that scene. We extract the data of the camera, so we know exactly the camera angle. Element 2, a set of bars, computer-generated, sitting there, okay? So we make computer-generated bars. And the third element, we take our synthetic digital stunt double of Robert, and we rotoscope him to the first element of Robert walking. Then we pass the digital one of Robert through the bars. In using this technique called collision detection, it creates a nice little disturbance around the bars and looks like putty passing through, or a fork passing through putty. Then we take frame for frame of the first element of Robert and project it against the result, and it creates the illusion of the putty occurring. On Terminator 2, my job was up front to actually build a computer-generated man, Robert Patrick. So we had Robert come up here, we painted a grid on him, and we shot him on the back lot, and I used that information, that actual film, to study his motion and actually construct a man. We took a set of his actual images and put bones on those images and animated the bones walking, then built skin over top of that, so that was the second stage. So we were studying his motion, and in order to have Robert's body animate, we had 30 channels approximately. Different channels that control, like the leg moving and the foot moving and the hands moving. And I guess the litmus test was sort of the part where he's walking into the fire, which kind of tested his invincibility.
Probably the most exciting combination of stunt work and computer imagery can be found in this sequence.
Get out.
In T2, there's a scene when Robert Patrick, playing the T-1000 robot, races out of a building on a motorcycle and jumps under the helicopter and smashes his head through the glass of the helicopter, the bubble on it, and then melts through the smaller hole that he's made as the polyalloy liquid, and then goes into the seat and reconstructs himself into the shape of the policeman again. And those were done through a series of things, one of which we shot Robert for one of the shots, sticking his head actually through the glass, and then we stretched the image. We pulled the image and stretched it into a blob shape and mapped that from the computer over a three-dimensional shape of a blob pushing through, and then blended the two together so it appeared as though his face was stretching, and then it turned into the chrome and moved on through. And the following couple of shots we did has got a typical computer graphic sort of animation of a shape going down as a blob into a seat and then forming up into a person again. And then the way we did the entire show is, then that shape is then, we call, mapped with reflections that were actually in the helicopter that we shot when we were shooting the show. Just still photograph views of all the different areas, looking forward, back, top, bottom, right, and left. Those reflections then are just taken with a still camera, which are scanned into the computer also, and what we call mapped onto this geometry that we've made. This is what makes these characters look like the chrome, as opposed to a typical computer graphic logo of a certain Friday night movie or something like that you might see. Instead of it looking like plastic or like wood that a lot of computer graphics does, we've mapped on the reflections, so this thing looks like it's a chrome shape.
Get out.
Well, that's our look at computer-generated effects. Computers are indeed Hollywood's newest and most powerful visual effects tool, particularly when they're in the hands of Hollywood's greatest visual effects artists. That's a wrap.